Chapter 14, Rump to the Rescue. It was afternoon when we reached my cottage. Red stood by me and finally spoke her mind. "You're going to go, aren't you, to help Opal?" It wasn't a question, really, and the declaration cleared my own doubt. I had to go. Red let out a heavy sigh. Her brow was knit and her mouth curved down, but she didn't look angry. Was she sad? I've never seen Red sad. That's when I realized that even if she did call me an idiot, Red really cared what happened to me. She was my one true friend. "Will you take care of milk for me?" "She gives some milk still." She nodded. "What about your donkey?" "I'm taking him with me." I didn't want to burden Red too much, and even though nothing was ornery and stubborn, he might be able to carry me or my things if I could get him to move. "How will you find Opal?" Red asked. I shrugged. "What if she's locked up?" I shrugged. "What if you get caught and shot with an arrow or poisoned ore? Then I'll be dead, Red." I smiled because of the rhyme, even though it wasn't a happy one. Red gave me one of her rare smiles. "You're an idiot, Rump, but the smartest idiot I know." I put my hands in my pockets, pulled out the seed Red's granny had given me, and held it up to the sun. I thought how the odds were stacked against both the little seed and me. A boy all tangled in life and magic. We didn't have a chance, really, but sometimes you still have to try. "Little things can grow big," I said. "Under the right circumstance," said Red, and she bent down and dug up some cold earth. I placed the little seed in the hole and we covered it up. After Red left, I stuffed just a few things in a satchel. A dry loaf of bread, some biscuits, a skin of water, and my mother's bobbin from her spinning wheel. I knew that it wasn't the reason for the magic, but I wanted it with me. A little piece of mother, a piece of home. I wished I could take a piece of Gran with me too, but there was nothing. I would have to carry a memory. It was late afternoon as I walked through the village toward the road that led down the mountain. I stopped once and looked back on the village. I had never seen it from the view. The houses were stacked in jumbled clusters up the mountainside, some so lopsided they looked like they might slide right down. Smoke rose from chimneys and windows were lit with candles. The mill stood above all the houses, the biggest building by far. High above the village were the mines that I had worked in my whole life. I had never been anywhere but the village. Even though I knew there were other kingdoms and villages and probably mountains all over the world, this had always been my world. I imagined my mother leaving yonder and feeling the same. In my mind, I thought I would not be gone for very long, but my heart, I felt like I was leaving on a great expedition, and if I ever returned, I would be very different. I hoped I would be different. I was leaving the mountain at last. True, my leaving might have sounded far grander if I was leaving a place with a real name like Ochelif or Osteria, but I left just the same. It all sounded so big and adventurous, but my lofty sentiments were squashed because I had gotten even halfway down the mountain. Nothing didn't carry a thing. Instead, I hauled him. It was about as fun as playing with pixies. When I tried to ride him, he either wouldn't move or moved so fast I couldn't hold on. Then he stumbled and fell off. I ended up pulling him the whole way while he bellowed and spit in my ear. When I finally reached the bottom of the mountain, it was night. Luckily, there was a little moonlight, or I wouldn't have been able to see at all. I met a man driving a wagon and asked him how far it was to the kingdom, in what direction. He pointed in the direction I was already going and said it was a good 12 miles. My heart sank. "I would gladly give you a ride in my cart," said the man, "but your donkey doesn't look like he'd keep up with the horse." "No," I said, "he wouldn't." I wanted to kick nothing. Maybe I could just tie him up here and get a ride anyway, but then someone might steal him. Worthless as he was the only company I had on this journey. I gave another tug and we plodded down the road. After an hour, I was starving, so I ate all the biscuits in my sack. We found a stream to drink from and some early spring grass for nothing. After that, he settled right down in the grass and didn't want to move. I pulled and pulled, but he just bellowed. I got on his back and kicked him as hard as he could with both legs. He still didn't move. I pulled out my mother's bobbin and poked his side with it. He bellowed and jumped right up and started trotting down the path with me hanging on his sides. Nothing carried me for only a few miles before I had to start pulling him again. And after another hour, I wondered if the man with the cart had been mistaken, and it was really 12 miles or even 30. I had no sense for distance. Maybe I wouldn't get there by tonight. Something really awful would happen in the morning. What would the king do to Opal and her family if she didn't spin the straw into gold? How could I go back home if I failed? The road widened and small houses started to appear. Their windows are all dark and quiet. It must have been very late, but the houses gave me hope that I was close to the king's city. The houses got closer together and smaller, and they were very close and stacked on top of each other. They looked like little towers made of rubble that a wind might blow over. Then they spread out a little and got bigger, a lot bigger. The road began to wind and curve up a steep hill, and at the top was a giant stone wall. Beyond that wall was King Barf's castle. Opal was there. Nothing would not go up the hill. It was almost as steep as the mountain, and no matter how much I poked and jerked and kicked, he wouldn't budge. So I reasoned that if he wouldn't budge for me, he wouldn't budge for anyone else. I left him on the side of the road by a tree, and I hoped a swarm of pixies would bite his bony, stubborn rump. Halfway up the hill, my courage started to drain with my energy. In all the excitement of being a hero, I hadn't thought any of this through. When I started my journey, it was as if all the obstacles in my way weren't really obstacles at all, just minor annoyances. But when I reached the top of the hill, I realized that they were definitely obstacles and big ones. The castle was surrounded by towering walls with closed gates and soldiers guarding the gates with spears and bows and arrows. Would I be a coward if I went back down the hill? What would Gran do? It was a silly question. Gran would never have gotten into this mess in the first place. Oh, how I wished I could talk to her now. I needed to think. I thought about what was in my way and what I had to do to get it out of my way. I needed to go to Opal in the castle, but in my way there were guards and spears and arrows and a stone wall and possibly more of that beyond the wall. What did I have? An ornery donkey stuck at the bottom of a hill, a dry loaf of bread, and an old bobbin. And one more thing. At that very moment, a miracle happened. A horse and cart came up the hill, and the driver hopped down to speak with the guard. "Straw deliveries go to the stables," said one of the guards. "Other side of the castle. This 'ere straw ain't for stables. This is for chamber. Had an order for it to be brought this way." "Tonight? I got a letter." Straw for a chamber? That had to be for Opal. The guard looked down at the letter the man was holding out. While they spoke, I crept to the back of the cart, unseen by the guards or the driver. I pulled myself up and dug myself into the straw until I was completely hidden. In a moment, I heard the gate squeak open, and the cart rolled forward. I almost laughed. The cart ambled on for a minute, but then stopped, and I heard the driver unhitch the mule. The driver spoke with probably more guards, and then I was pretty sure we were inside the castle because everything started to echo. The straw was scratching at my arms and neck and everywhere. I struggled to remain still, and the itching stirred up an uncomfortable memory, also involving straw. It had happened a few years ago. I was hiding from Frederick and Bruno in a barn behind a huge stack of straw. They were mad at me because I had sneezed really loudly in the middle of their older brother's wedding, right at the quiet part. So Frederick and Bruno were chasing after me, trying to light my pants on fire. I guess I should have realized that a haystack is not a smart place to hide when you're running from fire. The whole barn burned down, and I barely made it out alive. Needless to say, my pants did catch on fire. The memory made me shudder. I suddenly wondered that I jumped into this pile of straw so readily. Finally, the cart stopped and a man knocked on the door. A few muffled exchanges. I heard a woman's voice, Opal's maybe. Suddenly, I was tumbling out of the cart, rolling in the straw as it came down. The straw still covered me on the floor, and I heard the cart trundle away as the door shut. I was just about to peek in when I felt hands digging into the straw. Pulling out big clumps, I froze, and then someone grabbed my hair and yanked, and I yelped, and I flopped out of the straw, hit my head on the floor with a loud crack. "Oh," said a voice. I looked up and saw a woman standing over me, but it was not Opal. The woman had a feather duster and a rag tucked in her skirt. She was older, but tried to hide it with lots of rogue on her cheeks and lips. She was holding a big piece of fabric in one hand and a fistful of straw in the other. The straw was to stuff a mattress. It wasn't for spinning. The maid's surprised face suddenly turned hard. She scooted back and reached for something behind her, a poker, and pointed it right at me. "Get out, you little rascal! There's nothing in here for you to steal." I wasn't. She whacked me on the shoulder with the poker. "Get out!" she whacked me again. "You filthy mongrel, get out!" I scrambled to my feet, my satchel clutched to me. I tried to reach for the door, but the woman swung at me again, and I rolled to the other side of the room. "Thief!" the woman shrieked. "Thief!" I ducked as she jabbed at me again. "Thief in the castle!" She lunged with the poker until I was pressed up against a window. A window? I hadn't gone up any stairs, so the ground must be just below. I fumbled behind me until I found a latch. The window flew open and I tumbled out, landing flat on my back. All the air was knocked out of me, and sparks flew in my eyes. But I had to run because the maid's bellowing was sure to bring the guards after me any moment. I ran along the castle walls until I found some bushes to hide in, then dove in. Arrgh! They were full of thorns. I held still and didn't breathe. Thorns stuck in me everywhere, but I bit down on my tongue and watched as guards came to the window that I'd fallen out of. A few jumped out and walked around searching. One came to the very bush I was hiding in, but it was so dark and I was so still he didn't see me. Soon they were all gone. I forced myself to wait in the bush a little longer, and while I did, all my pains sank in. My head and back were sore from the fall, and my shoulders stung from the maid's whacks. I had needle thorns sticking in my head and arms, but especially in my bottom. Destiny can be so cruel. I looked to the sky, wondering how long before dawn. The sky was still dark, but there couldn't be more than a few hours left, maybe even less. How much straw had the king given Opal to spin, and how long did she have to spin it? I better find her fast. Slowly I crept out of the bush and tried to remove all the thorns. The earth was wet and squishy beneath my feet, so my steps made squelching sounds. I froze and waited for movement or noise. All was still. Heroic rescues are not as glamorous as people imagine. I thought as I squished along the muck. The next step was to find a tower. I was sure Opal would be locked up in one. In grand stories, damsels in distress were always trapped in towers. That was the point of towers, so no one could rescue you unless your hair was a mile long. Opal's hair wasn't that long, so how to get in? There were many towers in the castle. Which tower? Think. Most of the windows were dark, but 2 towers had lights in them that I could see. I considered the location of each tower. They were on opposite ends of the castle. On one end was the main gate to the castle, where the king and queen and other royal guests made their grand entrances. On the other end were the stables and blacksmith, where there were piles and piles of straw. If you needed to fill a room with straw, it would be better if the room were near the straw. I approached the tower on the stable side. There was no one around, not even guards, which seemed odd. I put my hands on the tower wall, feeling around. A few stones budged. I could fit my hands easily in the cracks. I pulled one stone completely out. You'd think someone as rich as a King Barf would keep his castle in better repair. There were so many holes and loose stones, but I suppose King Barf didn't worry much about the outside of his castle. He probably paid more attention to the inside where all the gold was. I started to climb. It wasn't so difficult, almost like climbing a tree. I just had to test each hold to make sure it would support my weight. Being small and skinny was really working in my favor. If I were a hulking, armor-clad hero, the tower would have crumbled like dry bread. Tired and out of breath, I finally reached the window. Mercifully, it was open. I heard whimpering and sniffing. Someone was crying. It had to be Opal. With the last of my strength, I pulled myself up, slid over the windowsill, and flopped on the ground like a giant slug. Ooh! Opal rushed to the fireplace and grabbed the poker. She stood over me, the poker raised over her head. I flinched. Opal lowered her weapon and stared at me with her big blue eyes. What are you doing here? I'm here to rescue you, I said. She stared at me blankly, so blankly I thought maybe she hadn't heard me. And then she laughed. She laughed and laughed, high and shrill, and finally she snorted. Aren't you the one called Butt? It wasn't exactly the heroic welcome I'd hoped for. Rump, I said. They call me Rump. Rump, she said, holding back a laugh. Rump, my hero. Then she burst into more laughter. She leaned over, holding her stomach. She hee-hee-heed and ha-ha-ha'd and giggle-gaggled and fell into the straw, rolling in it like one of her brothers. And then suddenly she was crying. Not just whimper, whimper, sniffle, snuffle crying. Her whole body heaved with sobs and snot ran down her face, and she didn't even bother to wipe it off. Help me, you, she sobbed. I'm supposed to turn all this straw into coal because my father told the king I could. I was getting nervous about all that noise she was making. What if someone came into the room to see if she was all right? Opal sobbed again. Why did he do that? Because I can spin the straw into gold, I said. Your father knows I can. I think that's why he told the king. He didn't think he would take you away. He thought the king would just ask for more gold. Opal stopped crying and wiped the snot from her nose on her sleeve. The gold? You can spin the gold? I was surprised that she was surprised. Had she never seen the gold before? Hadn't she wondered what I'd been trading for food all these months? Yes, I can spin the gold. Opal wrinkled her nose as I smelled ratchet. Prove it. Spin all that to gold. She pointed to the heaping pile of straw in the corner. It was more than I had ever spun at once. Maybe 3 or 4 mattresses full. In front of it was a spinning wheel, big and shiny, the wood freshly carved and polished. Well, said Opal. She was tapping her foot impatiently. What are you waiting for? She didn't look so sweet or innocent anymore. I sat down on the wheel and took a few straws in my hand. I could see things through Opal's eyes now. How ridiculous this seemed. Me spin straw into gold? How could a small, foolish boy possibly do such a thing? I had thought myself a great hero, but now I saw how silly I looked. With shaking hands, I fed the straw through the wheel and spun, holding my breath, ready for it to break and fall to the ground, just to mock me. Rear, rear, rear. Gold wrapped onto the bobbin. I released my breath. Opal gasped and clapped her hands to her mouth. Her eyes showed that some greedy gleam I knew so well from the miller. She reached to touch the gold, but my hand came down over the bobbin. What will you give me? I asked. Give you? I have to give you something? You want me to spin a pile of straw into gold for nothing? What do you want? I thought of all the things I wanted more food on the mountain, a horse to replace nothing, more hens, a family, my whole name. But the mere thought of asking for anything made my tongue swell and my mouth clamp shut. Just as the witch had said, I could make no request. Only beg and take was offered. What will you give me? I asked. Opal wound her tongue around her mouth, eyes blank. She put her finger to her lips and then her hands on her waist. Oh, bother, what was going through her mind? I was beginning to suspect that the name Opal bestowed a destiny that gave you lots of looks but maybe not so many brains. Finally, she felt at her neck. I will give you my necklace. she said, and relief washed over me once again. My father gave it to me, and it's made of pure gold. Probably gold I spun. I took the necklace and stuffed it in my pocket, breathing deeply. This wasn't so bad. Shut the windows, I said, getting down to business. They were still gapping open for my arrival. I like the fresh air. The straw makes me sneeze. I'm going to make a pile of gold. Every pixie within a mile of here will be swarming this room if you leave those windows open, and that will probably be worse than a sneeze. She scowled at me and shut the windows. I began to spin again. Woo, woo, woo. Bit by bit, I worked on the pile of straw. As it dwindled, a stack of gold took its place. Opal watched, transfixed for a while, and then fell asleep on the floor. A skein of gold clenched in her hands. I spun the last of the straw just as the sky turned purple. I crawled out the window, my eyes so heavy and my limbs so tired. I had to concentrate extra hard just to make my fingers grip the wall. I had done my duty, and now I could go home. But first I needed to eat and rest a little. I made my way across the castle grounds to the stables, where I ate the rest of the bread from my satchel. I was so thirsty I drank water from a horse's trough. The horse didn't seem to mind. Then I found an empty stall and made myself a nest of straw. As I was becoming quite fond of straw. It's comfortable to sleep in, and pixies didn't like it. Straw is better than gold, I thought. Just as I was drifting to sleep, I swore to myself that I would never spin again. Never. And I didn't want to look at gold ever again. But I was very tired, and I wasn't thinking clearly.